record rainfall, extreme heat, and raging wildfires, the U.S. is currently getting hit by extreme weather from literally all sides. Less than 2 days after Tropical Storm Hilary battered the West Coast, another tropical storm, this one called Harold, made landfall in Texas today. The storm is the first one of the Atlantic hurricane season. Another Atlantic storm, Franklin, is expected to make landfall in the Dominican Republic and Haiti by tomorrow. All this as some 100 million people across the United States were under heat alerts today, with heat index values crossing well over 100 in some places. This heat dome is expected to set hundreds of new record highs from the Midwest to the Gulf Coast by this weekend. One school district in Missouri announcing early release for the rest of the week because of those high temperatures. Wildfires are also raging in Washington, Oregon, and neighboring Canada. 2 people have died in the state of Washington so far, and dozens of homes and structures have been destroyed. The biggest one, the Gray Fire, has only been 25% contained as of right now. Meanwhile, there is also the aftermath of Tropical Storm Hilary. The storm broke rainfall records in 4 states, Idaho, Montana, Nevada, and Oregon. It was the first tropical storm to hit Southern California in 84 years. Some cities there look something like this right now, absolutely covered in mud. The mud trapped some residents in Cathedral City, a town in Coachella Valley. Authorities there had to rescue some elderly members of that community with bulldozers. Cleanup efforts are now underway, but those could take days. Let's bring in NBC's Jake Ward, who is right there in Cathedral City for us. Jake, you have been there all day. So much mud seems to just be piled up behind you. We can see some people trying to clean their driveway. What is it like on the ground?
Yeah, well, that's right. When we arrived here this morning, Ellison, you really could not move around this place at all. And that's because of a factor that I hadn't thought about. I mean, I knew that there had been record rainfall here, right? This region saw nearly half of its annual rainfall in a single hour. It broke hourly, daily, monthly, and seasonal records. But what I forgot about is the mud. That's the thing that sticks around. And even though you can wait for the rain to stop and for the water to drain away, the mud does not do that. It simply sits until you can physically remove it. And that's why you have all of these neighbors coming to each other's assistance, trying to help them free their vehicles, open up their driveways. All of this street was buried under mud at the beginning of the day, but thanks to their hard work and the hard work of bulldozers, they've been managing to get it free. Now, all of this it has a very happy feel. We've been watching people pull each other's vehicles out. It's been a very sort of productive day. But yesterday did not have that feeling. You had people having to be evacuated from a nursing home, as you mentioned, riding in the bulldozer. We spoke to one of those people who'd been rescued in that way. She described just the sheer terror of having this mud come at her. Have a listen.
The mud is so fast with water. If you will fall down if you don't hold on something. But if it lasts for 30 minutes, we will drown there inside. We will die. Right. That was only 15 minutes, I thought. Not even 15 minutes when the flood came inside. Yeah, and it was already there. So if it lasted for 30 minutes, I thought we died.
We've been speaking to people who've been living here, 40 years or more, Ellison. They say they've never seen anything like this. It's totally unprecedented in this dry, arid region for them. They hope they will never, ever see it again.
Jake, another group of people who had to be evacuated, who needed help, happened in Los Angeles, right? There was a hospital there that lost power. How on earth did that happen?
Well, we don't know exactly the causes, but we do know that at the very height of the storm, White Memorial Hospital had what is considered, the worst case scenario, and that is the loss not just of primary power, but of the backup generator. And more than 200 patients had to be moved to another tower, several of them in critical condition. We know that 7 babies in the NICU had to be relocated as well. But amazingly, no one perished in that instance or in any of this region. It's really extraordinary. Southern California survived without a single fatality. And in fact, at that hospital, we added a human. A baby was born at that time. A brave mother did it under the light only of flashlights. So again, a lot of devastation here, but a lot of hope for what humanity is able to do in the face of all these challenges, Ellison.
The community there, Jake, it seems like they are doing so much to help each other, but what other sort of help do they need moving forward? Do they need help from the government? Do they feel like they're getting everything they need?
Well, certainly some of the big, heavy equipment you see going by is definitely necessary. It is not enough to go at it with the shovel you have lying around. But beyond that, the concern here in California, of course, is that all of this costs money, and insurance for flooding is a very rare thing. Just a single percentage number of homeowners in this region own anything like flood insurance. There have been some instances in the past. Over the winter, there was a levee that broke, and people in that region, in the Central Valley, received state assistance about 9 months later. They're receiving it right now. It's not clear whether those kinds of funds will be made available here, but one thing I would say to anybody watching this who is affected by these floodwaters and has no other option, the Small Business Administration will make a loan to you, even if you're not a business owner, up to $100,000 to recover or repair after a disaster at very low interest rates. It's sort of a last resort, but there is money out there. I would encourage anybody watching this to look at those sorts of resources, even if they don't have the flood insurance that so many people in a region like this are probably going to be taking a second look at in the future, Ellison.
That is incredibly helpful advice. Jake Ward, thank you. Thank you for being on the ground and bringing us those stories. We appreciate it. So where are the tropical storms headed to next? And will we see a break from this sweltering heat anytime soon? Let's bring in NBC News meteorologist Bill Cairns, who has all of the answers for your weather questions.
Can I just say no and no and say goodbye?
I feel like the answers, we're not going to like them. Bill, can we start, though, with the Atlantic storms? You know, so much concern there that there might be more of those this year with even more intensity than what we've seen so far. What are you expecting? What are we seeing right now?
Yeah, we knew that we were going to go through an active period. I mean, it was well advertised how warm the water is. So August 15th to October 15th, you can kind of, that 2-month period is like the peak of the season. We always have storms to track. And so the first one was what we dealt with was Harold. This became a tropical depression with the 5 o'clock advisory from the Hurricane Center. It's now heading into Mexico. About 30,000 people or so roughly still don't have power. Winds did hit 60 miles per hour. So it wasn't a nothing storm, but it wasn't devastating. We should be able to get everyone back online pretty quickly. We have been tracking a few showers and thunderstorms with it, but that's the worst of it. It'll dissipate over the high train of Mexico later on tonight. So we have to move on to what's next. And that's what next question really comes down into areas of the Caribbean. We're going to be watching closely to the Dominican Republic. This storm is a slow-moving, it's not even that well organized, but slow-moving storms over the high terrain is a bad recipe for flash flooding. Dominican Republic has 8,000 to 10,000 foot peaks, similar to Southern California, but this storm's only moving at 7 miles per hour. So that's going to wring out the rainfall. We could see up to 15 inches of rain in some areas. That will be occurring during the day tomorrow. So then it comes off Dominican Republic. Water's very warm all through this region between Bermuda, the Bahamas, and the East Coast. So the Hurricane Center kind of stalls it out a little bit, drifts it here. They do bring it back up to a hurricane by the time we get to Sunday. So then after this, everyone wants to know, where's it go then? Well, our long-range computer models do actually make it a big hurricane, probably a powerful one, but they do keep it off the East Coast by a couple hundred miles, maybe too close for comfort for Bermuda, but this is 5 to 7 days away. So we got some time to watch this and fine-tune this. But as of now, it looks like just huge waves and rip current threat for the East Coast. But again, that's not till Monday, Tuesday of next week. So, yeah, a lot going on.
We already see the heat alerts on the map right now. Break those down for us. I felt like this morning in New York, I thought maybe we're getting a little bit of a break. Felt a little fallish. False hope?
Well, the Northeast and portions of the northern Great Lakes are like, what heat? It hasn't been that hot of a summer. But areas of the middle of the country and all through the South, they're like, bring on September. I mean, August, we're done with you. We've had enough. Let's bring in the cooler air. So from Minneapolis all the way to New Orleans under these heat warnings, it's been day after day and not much relief from any breaks. And even at this hour, it still feels like 115 in Omaha and Kansas City. And this is in the shade. I know when the sun sets, it'll get a little bit better. But we've been really close to some record. Here's the values all through Missouri. St. Louis, 111. Earlier today, St. Louis was 117. That was the 4th highest heat index they've ever recorded there. And it's not like tomorrow's going to get much better. I mean, Memphis will feel like 112. Kansas City, 111. New Orleans will feel like 114. So it's hot and it's humid out there. And as we head through the extended forecast, a few areas get a little bit of relief, like Omaha. Your relief comes Friday into Saturday. Chicago, look at that. Saturday looks great, 76. St. Louis, back to a kind of normal by the time we get to the weekend. Same for you in Cincinnati, but unfortunately for our friends to the south, Little Rock, Dallas included, Birmingham, Ellison, not yet. It's going to be a while.
All right. We always complain about the weather, but we always appreciate how you break it down for us and give us everything we need to know. Bill Cairns, thank you. Recovery teams are entering the next phase of their search in the wake of the Maui fire. This as the death toll rose to at least 115. Today, officials said all single-family homes in the disaster area have now been searched, but over 800 people are still missing. The search is now moving to multifamily and commercial buildings, and according to FEMA, those searches will not be easy.
This fire moved through incredibly fast. Some buildings may not be stable, and when you talk about multiple stories of low-rise or mid-rise buildings, that's a serious challenge. Families want closure, and these teams are working to bring them that, and it's very challenging work right now.
Steve Patterson joins me now from Maui. Steve, hundreds of people are still missing, hundreds of families desperate for any answer. It's been almost 2 weeks now since these fires started. Why is it taking so long?
Well, a lot of it is due to a reason that is tough to say, which is that the bodies are so badly burned and decomposed due to how hot, and you heard the guy say how intense and how quickly that fire moved through, that it's hard to find remains. And those remains are so sensitive because they are so badly burned. So instead of bringing in heavy machinery to sort of just strip the roofs off of houses and dive into these hotels and businesses, they have to do it by hand. That is incredibly slow, labor-intensive work. Cadaver dogs cycle in every 20 minutes or so before they're tired from heat exhaustion. And then add on top of that, as we're moving into this next phase, going from a single family where you might find one or two sets of remains in one floor to multi-story complex. We're talking about apartment complex, a condo, a hospital, a school, a nursing home, where you could find 20 to 30 sets of remains or upwards of that in a multi-level structure that has been so badly burned, and you're trying to save the sanctity of these remains for DNA matching. It is very sensitive, it is very delicate, it is very heartbreaking. It will take a long, long time. Ellison?
Steve, I know you have been speaking constantly to residents, some who have expressed frustration in how the emergency response was initially handled. I know there was a public meeting in Maui today where local residents were actually able to speak to state and local officials directly. What did we hear in that meeting?
Yeah, look, this is 2 weeks of grievances that have not been aired until today. You know, before this, all sort of questions were being either directed to the media or being put out in public releases or videos or on social media. This was direct contact of residents, some who've lost everything, some who are looking for answers, some who are upset at the response, all in one, talking to these city officials. So it was testy. It was heated. And I think for good reason. These residents want answers to questions that they have not been getting. I just want to show you a little bit of the meeting. Listen to some concerns that residents had. Listen to this.
Why did you run if you're not going to step up to the plate when we need you the most? The sticky fingers are here to take it all and develop everything without any input. Lahaina needs to decide what happens in Lahaina.
That went on and on, covering everything from the initial response to the future of housing. But I think the biggest thing that we've all heard, especially on the ground here, is that there is sort of a lack of communication, which is why today was so important for that interfacing with the public that, frankly, is suffering. Ellison?
Steve Patterson, thank you for your reporting, your compassionate reporting on the ground for days and days now. Thank you. A remarkable rescue in Pakistan today, nearly 1,000 feet in the air. This is unbelievable. 7 children and a teacher were stuck in a cable car over a ravine for hours after cables snapped. They were on their way to school when it happened. Rescuers dropped from helicopters trying to reach them. They were able to successfully rescue some, but then night came, and the Pakistani military said they'd have to suspend the rescue because helicopters could not fly in the dark. Then this, absolutely amazing. Local residents stepped in to help. You see them in the video. They, along with rescuers, formed a human zip line of sorts, pulling the students and a teacher to safety. NBC News foreign correspondent Raf Sanchez has more.
We have been covering this heart-stopping story all day, and it is such a relief to be able to come on the air to tell you that it ended happily, because for a couple of hours, it really looked like it might not. This all started at about 7 a.m. local time. These 7 kids, their teacher, in that cable car on their way up to school. This is a common way to get around in these mountainous, remote regions in Pakistan. One of the overhead lines snapped, and so that cable car dangling 900 feet in the air, hanging almost literally by a thread. The Pakistani military scrambling helicopters, they got above the car. They were able to lower commandos down and were able to rescue one of those students that way. But the concern that the wash, the turbulence from the helicopter's rotor blades were causing the car to shake, and there was real concern it could cause it to fall. Now, as the sun went down, the choppers were forced to land. They couldn't keep operating in the dark, but rescuers, local people from nearby villages, coming up with a kind of low-tech solution, a pulley system. And so hand by patient hands, standing on the edge of this mile-wide ravine, they were able to pull the remaining kids and the teacher back to safety. A little bit before midnight local time, the Prime Minister of Pakistan tweeting Alhamdulillah. That is an expression in Arabic that means God's blessings. This was an enormous relief, not just to the people of Pakistan, but frankly to people all around the world who were watching this dramatic rescue unfold. And those kids are safely back with their parents tonight after what has really been an extraordinary day for them. Back to you.
Welcome back. Here are some of the other headlines we are watching tonight. One student is dead and at least 20 others are hurt after a school bus crash in Ohio today. Police say a minivan veered into oncoming traffic, hitting the bus and causing it to overturn. The school bus did not have seatbelts for the kids who were headed to their first day of school. Former crypto billionaire Sam Bankman-Fried pleaded not guilty today to updated charges of wire fraud, securities fraud, and money laundering in a Manhattan court. Also in court, his attorney says SBF is surviving off of bread, water, and occasionally peanut butter because the Brooklyn jail he is in is not accommodating his vegan diet. UPS workers approve what they're calling a historic deal, officially ending any threat of a strike. More than 86% of UPS workers voted to ratify the new 5-year contract, which includes pay raises, an end to forced overtime, and air conditioning in new trucks. Today, a federal judge heard arguments on whether to get rid of those buoys floating in the Rio Grande. The Justice Department says the barrier is an illegal attempt to block migrants from crossing the border. Texas Governor Greg Abbott has defended the barrier, saying it is necessary to stop the flow of migrants into his state. Former President Donald Trump will turn himself in to authorities in Fulton County, Georgia. He is one of 19 co-defendants indicted on charges related to their alleged attempts to overturn the legitimate results of the 2020 election. This morning, some of his co-defendants began to surrender. One of Trump's lawyers, John Eastman, was among those booked, and our very own Ali Vitale caught up with him outside of the courthouse.
Do you still think the election was stolen?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Still.
No question. No question in my mind.
Joining us now is NBC's Vaughn Hilliard. So, Vaughn, a bail bondsman named Scott Hall and Trump's attorney, who we just saw there, John Eastman, both surrendered earlier today. Walk us through what we saw happen and remind people who these people are.
Right, Ellison, we're talking about only 2 of the 19 defendants so far surrendering here to the Fulton County Jail. Now, there's about 72 hours left for the rest of them, including Donald Trump, to come in. The deadline set by the district attorney was this Friday. These 2 defendants coming in and going through this process is notable. One of them, Scott Hall, you mentioned, the bondsman, he is actually somebody who was indicted in relation to the alleged efforts to tamper with voting machines inside of Coffee County here in Georgia. And then you have John Eastman, who was one of Donald Trump's lawyers. He is alleged to have been at the forefront of the so-called fake elector scheme to rally together fake electors, not only here in Georgia, but several other states on behalf of Donald Trump, and have those ultimately be counted up on Capitol Hill in January of 2021 instead of Joe Biden's. Both men, they came and were processed here. John Eastman was inside the jail for about 90 minutes. They each having to post bond, like the rest of the defendants are expected to, Ellison.
So the former President Trump, he will turn himself in on Thursday. At least that's what he has said on his social media platforms. That's 2 days from now. He has already agreed to a $200,000 bond, right? So what do we expect Thursday to look like?
Right. Well, Wednesday night, if I may, Allison, is going to be the GOP presidential debate, which Donald Trump is not partaking in. Instead, he will be the main act on Thursday. And the main act is a jail here in the heart of Atlanta. And he will be. We are waiting to see what hour exactly he comes in. The jail is open 24 hours a day. He may come at any hour that he so desires. We expect Donald Trump to go through the process like most other defendants would. I say that because the sheriff had suggested that the defendants coming from this indictment would go through the normal process of being fingerprinted and having their mugshot taken. Of course, Donald Trump is a unique individual in the fact that he has Secret Service. And as we've seen from his other 3 indictments, because of security concerns, law enforcement in the jurisdictions have worked with Secret Service to ensure that he spends just a short amount of time during the booking process. We expect that to take place here. We don't expect him to be in a jail cell at all, but we expect this to be Donald Trump's first appearance here in Georgia, coming off of these state charges. And then ultimately come September is when we expect the formal arraignment, when he will ask to plead either guilty or not guilty, Allison.
All right. NBC's Vaughn Hilliard in Fulton County, Georgia for us. Thank you. It might be hard to believe, but the 2024 presidential election will be here before we know it, whether we want it to or not. And tomorrow night is the first Republican debate. 8 candidates qualified for this round, but not in attendance the current frontrunner, former President Donald Trump. Instead, sources tell NBC News that he sat down for a pre-recorded interview with former Fox News host Tucker Carlson, and it will air around the same time as the debate. Joining us now is NBC's Garrett Hake. Garrett, it is kind of odd, right? You were in Milwaukee where this debate will happen. The Republican leading in the polls right now will not be on stage there. Trump is ahead of Governor Ron DeSantis by more than 20 points in the latest NBC News poll. Everyone else is in the single digits. How do the other candidates prepare to break through when the person they really are trying to beat at this point is not actually going to be there?
Yeah, Allison, it is so unusual. These candidates have fought and scrapped for the opportunity to talk to an audience that is as big as this debate audience is expected to be, and the frontrunner's not even showing up. But he's probably still going to dominate the proceedings that happen in the arena behind me one way or the other. I think the best way I would break it down is among these 8 candidates who will be on stage, they fall into 2 camps. Those who want to go around Donald Trump to the nomination and those who want to go through him. The latter category is probably most exemplified by Chris Christie, maybe Asa Hutchinson, who feel like the only way to become the nominee is sort of like aggressively beat Donald Trump, to go out and discredit everything that he has stood for and to say there's another way, and it involves, you know, them, basically. That's a tough sell with the amount of power, that sway that Donald Trump has over the Republican base. The bulk of the other candidates want to go around him. They want to introduce themselves to the voter and basically try to appeal to folks who may have loved Donald Trump, the president, but are tired of Donald Trump, the dramatist, the guy who's at the center of so much controversy. It's a riskier strategy in a way. It doesn't have as sort of an obvious of a payoff, but it would start tomorrow night when normal people, folks who don't follow politics day in and day out, really start paying attention to this primary race.
And Garrett, there will be some candidates that are not on stage simply because they didn't qualify for this debate, right? Who will be missing in that category?
Yeah, look, there's a couple of them. I mean, frankly, there's dozens, but really of the sort of major minor candidates, if that makes sense. I'm thinking about folks like Will Hurd, Francis Suarez, Larry Elder. These were folks who were on the cusp of qualifying. Perhaps they had the number of donors the RNC wanted, 40,000 unique donors across the country, but they weren't able to notch at least 1% in polling, either in enough national polls or enough state polls to qualify. For them, the air gets thinner and thinner. It gets harder and harder to get purchase with Republican voters when you're not able to appear on the biggest stage. Interestingly enough, Francis Suarez, the mayor of Miami, had said publicly in the lead up to this debate that if candidates didn't qualify for this first debate, they should drop out. Well, guess what, Ellison? Tonight he's candidate who didn't qualify. No sign of a decision for him to drop out yet, but it does get harder and harder as we go to continue to sustain a campaign that can't hit those basic thresholds to appear on a debate stage tomorrow night.
Interesting stuff. Garrett Hake in Milwaukee. Thank you. Coming up, advocacy groups are urging President Biden to declare a climate emergency. But what does that actually mean? We'll break it down for you. But first, you've got to see this. A Tennessee zoo says it has welcomed a baby giraffe. And get this, she was born without any spots. The zoo says she's the only one of her kind on the planet. The 6-foot newborn doesn't have a name just yet, but you can help them choose. Just head over to the Bright Zoo's Facebook page and let them know what you think fits her best. We hope she gets a name just as unique as she is. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Here are some of the headlines we are following on the West Coast tonight. Alec Baldwin is trying to stop crew members from taking him to court for the deadly Rust movie shooting. Baldwin's lawyers have filed a motion to dismiss the civil case for which crew members are blaming him for negligent and reckless conduct. A hearing on that motion is set for tomorrow. Meanwhile, the criminal trial for Hannah Gutierrez-Reed, the weapons expert on that film, has now been pushed to next year. She is being charged with involuntary manslaughter for the death of cinematographer Helena Hutchins. Tropical storm Hilary forced an Alaska Airlines to make a hard landing Sunday night, and it was all caught on video. The airline says Flight 1288 could not taxi to the gate when it arrived at John Wayne Airport in Orange County, California. The plane's main landing gear collapsed and was resting on the engine. Despite this scary moment, everyone on board was okay. And some of Hollywood's biggest names hit the picket lines in Burbank for a SAG-AFTRA strike.
And so now we are called to support the union, support the leadership, and to stand together for the long haul, and to stick to it like a stamp. The studios are always seeing what is and asking why. Let us continue to dream things that never were and say, why not?
The Actors Union has been on strike since July 14th. They're demanding higher pay and protection from the use of AI. Now to Washington State, where crews are still working to put out 2 dangerous wildfires burning in Spokane County. That's on the east side of the state near the Idaho border. The Oregon Road fire is burning just north of Spokane. That is still at 0% containment. The Gray fire is now 25% contained, but it is wreaking havoc on the small town of Medical Lake. Together, these fires have scorched over 20,000 acres, burned hundreds of buildings, and claimed 2 lives. NBC's Jesse Kirsch is there.
Ellison, some promising updates here in Spokane. Not far away, the Gray Fire, one of the wildfires burning in this area, is at a reported 25% containment. As that progress is made by the firefighters, officials have said that around 4,000 people from Medical Lake and the surrounding area are able to return to their homes. So evacuation orders being lifted for around 4,000 people. Still around 1,000 people in that community who are being told to not return to their homes. So obviously tough times continuing for people, but some signs of hope there as well. Obviously, there's tough news that some people's homes have been burned down. And we've seen that firsthand, how the fires attacked some homes and others were left standing right next door. It's honestly, it's very tough to see. But the other piece of good news that came today is that we've had a good amount of rain here in this area in eastern Washington state, and that helps out firefighters quite a bit. Here's part of what we learned from officials earlier about what that can mean, what the rain can mean for battling these wildfires.
How much help is this? This is a tremendous help. So it's taken the heat and the dryness out of the fine fuel. So it means that fire is no longer carrying and it's no longer as active. And it allows firefighters to get in close to work on the hot areas that are left over to do what we call mop-up, to eliminate the potential for future flare-ups once it does dry out. So this is a firefighter's best dream right now.
All that said, even with rain falling, we saw smoke and flames coming up from the ground, which just underscores that the situation still in this part of the state is treacherous, obviously, for those firefighters who are battling those places, as well as the communities that have been impacted. Ellison?
Yeah, Jesse Kirsch, thank you for that. Whether it is wildfires or hurricanes, extreme and devastating weather events are becoming far more common across the country. And tonight, the White House is pledging its support for people experiencing what they call, quote, extreme weather worsened by climate change. But some climate advocates are not satisfied, and they are once again urging the president to declare climate change a national emergency. But what would that actually do? NBC News Now anchor Hilary Jackson explains.
Record heat and pounding rain down south, mudslides out west, wildfires coast to coast. President Biden, in the face of these disasters, now facing new pressure to declare climate change a national emergency. It's something Democrats have been hoping for a while, even before Congress passed that sweeping climate law last year.
We are in an emergency, and it is a worldwide emergency.
It didn't happen then, but activists hope it will now.
President Biden, we need your help. Declare a climate emergency.
So what would that even do? Declaring an emergency can unlock special powers for a president in a crisis without needing approval from Congress, thanks to a law passed nearly 50 years ago. Since then, every president has declared at least one emergency during their time in office. Former President Trump, for example, signing one in the pandemic. Former President George W. Bush declaring one after 9/11. Now, 57% of voters support the naming of a new national emergency on climate if Congress doesn't do more, according to recent polling. If President Biden were to do that, it could mean new incentives, for example, to cut greenhouse gas emissions, speed up EV production, and build more renewable energy centers.
Are you prepared to declare a national emergency with respect to climate change?
We've already done that. We're moving. It is the existential threat to humanity.
So you've already declared that national emergency?
Practically speaking, yes.
Yeah.
But practically speaking is different from actually declaring it. And if he did, Republicans would probably sue, meaning the whole thing could land at the steps of the Supreme Court. A legal challenge and an environmental one.
Hilary Jackson, thank you. It is the first time malaria has been locally acquired in Maryland in some 40 years, meaning the person who got it had not traveled recently outside of the United States. That's why this is such a big deal. No one in the country in 40 years has gotten it in this country. NBC News correspondent Tom Costello has more on how climate change could be bringing this deadly disease back to the States.
The big question for researchers is a new homegrown strain of malaria showing up across the country, or is it malaria coming from overseas?
How many mosquitoes are in there?
About 200, and we grow about 50,000 mosquitoes a week.
50,000. Dr. Fotini Sinis runs the Johns Hopkins Malaria Research Institute, where they study the mosquitoes that carry malaria. While the U.S. largely eliminated malaria more than 60 years ago, 500,000 people still die each year in Africa, with children most at risk. But this summer, 9 people have been diagnosed in the U.S. In Florida,
we do have a 7th case of malaria that's been locally transmitted.
1 case in Texas, and recently 1 in Maryland, the furthest case so far north in decades. But none of the victims had traveled to a malaria endemic region. Mosquitoes live just 2 to 4 weeks. So were the victims bitten by mosquitoes that had picked it up from a foreign traveler, or is the malaria homegrown?
And the question is, given climate change, is this going to become more frequent? We actually don't know the answer to that.
Mosquitoes need heat, humidity, and standing water.
During milder winters, like the one we had in the mid-Atlantic, fewer mosquitoes die off in the winter, which means there are more of them in the summer.
They can start reproducing earlier. So by the time we get to June, we have more mosquitoes.
The first signs of malaria infection: body aches and chills, a fever of 104, and GI problems. See a doctor quickly. Pregnant women are especially vulnerable. Experts recommend wearing long sleeves and using mosquito repellent, and remove still standing water anywhere near the house. Tom Costello, NBC News, Baltimore.
And still to come, Japan is getting ready to release radioactive wastewater into the ocean. We'll have more on that controversial move after the break. Welcome back. Let's take a quick look around the world in 80 seconds. At least 18 bodies were found in a wildfire zone in Greece. Authorities are now working to identify the bodies. Local fire officials say it is possible the victims were migrants from Turkey. And at least 15 people are dead and more than 30 hurt in Mexico after a crash between a bus and a freight truck. Today, the bus was carrying mostly Venezuelan migrants when it all happened. This crash comes just 1 month after 5 Honduran migrants were killed when their van crashed on Mexico's southern coast. Niger is now suspended from the African Union after its military staged a coup last month. The 55-nation union called on the international community to reject the new regime and avoid giving it any sort of legitimacy. The suspension means that the military junta will not be allowed to vote or participate in any union activities or amendments. And the U.S. is asking any American in Belarus to leave immediately. It comes as Russia builds up their forces for their invasion of Ukraine in that border area. The private military mercenary group Wagner is also supposed to be located in that country. Americans are being asked to exit Belarus by plane or through the Lithuanian or Latvian borders. U.S. citizens have not been able to cross the border into Poland. Japan is gearing up to release treated radioactive wastewater into the ocean on Thursday. It will come from the Fukushima nuclear power plant on Japan's Pacific coast. You might remember that was hit by a tsunami back in 2011. It became the epicenter of a major nuclear accident. NBC News foreign correspondent Janice Mackey-Frayer has more on the international pushback to the controversial decision.
This plan has been years in the works, and it's hotly contested. If the weather is right, it's set to happen on Thursday. Treated radioactive wastewater from the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear plant will be released into the ocean. It'll happen every so often, probably for years, until ultimately over 1 million tons of the water has been discharged. This is the power plant that was ruined in 2011 by the earthquake and tsunami in Japan, triggered a triple meltdown. The water has been used to cool melted fuel, and that cooling water has been stored in these massive tanks, and these tanks are now nearly full. Japan's government is adamant that the plan is safe, that the water has been put through this powerful filtration system that has taken out most radioactive material, everything except tritium, which experts say isn't harmful to people in small doses. And Japanese officials say tritium is regularly released by nuclear plants in other places like China, South Korea, and France. The International Atomic Energy Agency has signed off on the plan, saying that it meets the agency's standards. But there is opposition to this on all levels across the region. Chinese officials today were warning that they would take all necessary measures against what they call nuclear sewage. China is the world's #1 buyer of Japan's fish and seafood, and the fisheries industry worries that reputational damage is going to kill their business. Japan's government has spent months trying to convince the public everywhere that the plan is safe. The prime minister just talked with President Biden about it at Camp David. With the date now set, it's unlikely that it's going to unfold without protest.
Janice Mackey-Frayer, thank you. Police in Southern California are now calling the shooting of a shop owner a possible hate crime. That's because the shooting broke out after a dispute over a pride flag. NBC's Maggie Vespa has more.
Tonight, a California resort town consumed with grief after Lori Carlton, a store owner, wife, and mother of 9, was killed, authorities say, confronting hate.
It's hard for me not to just break down.
The San Bernardino County Sheriff says Travis Ikaguchi shot the 66-year-old Friday at her Lake Arrowhead area shop, adding her death is now being investigated as a potential hate crime.
That Ikaguchi tore down a pride or rainbow flag that was hanging in front of the Magpie store and yelled many homophobic slurs. And during the confirmation, Ikaguchi shot and killed Carlton.
Nearby business owners say customers ran from the scene. Deputies later killing Ikaguchi in a shootout. The sheriff says the 27-year-old was armed with an unregistered semi-automatic handgun, noting his social media is rife with anti-LGBTQ posts.
It looks like the suspect acted alone, but we want to be sure that that's the case.
And Carlton didn't identify as LGBTQ, but friends say she was an ally. Her death comes amid a rise in attacks against the LGBTQ community. One study tracking more than 350 incidents of hate and extremism between June 2022 and April 2023. Outside a second store Carlton owned in Los Angeles, a growing memorial. Robin Lyles was a close friend.
How do you make sense of this?
You can't make sense of it. It's senseless.
Carlton's daughter calling her mom fearless, writing on Instagram her flags had been torn down before, and she always responded by putting up a bigger one, adding simply, "Our family is broken." Maggie Vespa, NBC News.
Before we go, it is time for the future of everything. Airplane tickets are not getting any cheaper, but some bargain flyers are using a travel hack that's apparently saving them hundreds of dollars. We'll have more on the future of flying coming up. For tonight's future of everything, let's talk travel. As travel demand continues to surge, more people are searching for a bargain. It's causing travelers to use a controversial tactic that's called skip lagging. Have you heard of it? It's clever, but apparently a risky travel hack. It can save you hundreds of dollars on airfare, but a lot of airlines say it violates their policies, and now they are starting to crack down on the practice. Vicki Nguyen has more.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.